Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Should we repeal the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? A majority of the delegates to Idaho's Republican Party convention said yes. What do you think? Join the conversation. Stay tuned. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. The 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allows for the direct election of U.S. senators, but a growing movement is calling for that amendment's repeal. When delegates to the Constitutional Convention gathered in 1787, they debated long and hard about how to elect U.S. senators. Most delegates agreed that members of Congress should be elected by the people. But the framers of the Constitution thought U.S. senators should be elected by state legislatures. George Mason argued that method would help check the power of the new federal government. The process worked well until the mid-1850s. Then some state legislatures couldn't overcome their own differences and vote to actually send a candidate, so Senate seats fell vacant. After the Civil War, problems continued. Senatorial elections were marred by intimidation and bribery. Efforts to change the way senators were elected weren't taken seriously until the early 1900s. In 1907, Oregon was the first state to begin direct election of U.S. senators. Backed by a growing reform movement, Senator Joseph Bristow and Idaho Senator William Borah led the charge to amend the U.S. Constitution. By 1913, the U.S. adopted the 17th Amendment, and ever since, U.S. senators have been elected directly by the people. But in recent years, states' rights supporters and others have called for a return to the old way of picking U.S. senators. This year, the Idaho Republican Party adopted a plank calling for the repeal of the 17th Amendment. So what do you think? Should we elect U.S. senators directly by the people or elected by state legislatures? Joining me tonight to debate this issue are two state legislators. Republican Representative Pete Nielsen supports the idea of a repeal. Thank you for being here, sir. Appreciate it. Also joining me is Democratic State Senator Elliott Work, who opposes the change. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And also joining us tonight to help put this issue into historical perspective is David Adler, Director of the University of Idaho's James A. and Louise Mcclure Center for Public Policy Research. He appears here tonight thanks to a grant from the Idaho Humanities Council. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Thanks, Joan.
And of course, we want to hear from you. Give us a call, toll free at 1-800-973-9800. Let's get this debate going, sir. Why do you think we should repeal the 17th Amendment?
Well, to create a balance and a check that we had before that has been lost by the 17th Amendment. In reality, what we have now is two bodies of legislative people back there that are responsible to the people. Originally, the idea was to have the states have a say in the federal government and be the protector from the federal government taking too much control. And Mason probably said it the best. Whatever power may be necessary for the national government, a certain portion must necessarily be left with the states. It's impossible for one power to pervade the extreme parts of the United States so as to carry equal justice to them. The state legislatures ought to have some means of defending themselves against the encroachments of the national government. In every other department, we have studiously endeavored to provide for its self-defense. Shall we leave the states alone, unprovided with the means for this purpose? And what better means can we provide than giving them some share in, or rather to make them a constituent part of the national establishment? If the state legislators were still appointing the senators, I'm convinced that the senators would pay more attention to the 10th Amendment, also more attention to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that enumerates the powers of the federal government and not allow them to encroach in those things. And you can't have a federal government without the states in the first place. And who was the creator of the federal government? It was the states. And all of a sudden we have a situation developing where the creature is becoming greater than the creator. And that was all lost with the 17th Amendment. We need to return to the 17th Amendment to correct that balance and have that check there so that we do protect the sovereignty of the states.
Senator, why do you oppose the
Well, I don't even know where to start. First of all, I think it's insulting to the people of the state of Idaho to tell them that they aren't smart enough, that they can't discern the correct candidates to send to Washington to protect our state's interests. The representatives forgetting history, which you mentioned in your lead-up, this became a corrupt issue throughout the states. We had states that weren't even sending senators to the federal government because they couldn't make decisions. They were tied up between inter-party fights, corruption, bribery, nationalization of legislative elections, national entities getting involved in these elections, buying elections in the legislature. The idea of going back to the bad old days, which the representative doesn't seem to be remembering actually were the bad old days, it just seems foolhardy to me. It's just the idea that somehow the state would have more power over a state senator or over a U.S. senator that was appointed by the legislature, when in fact there was never any power of recall. So the legislature would appoint the U.S. senator. The senator would go and serve for 6 years. The idea that we would have any more power over that person as a legislative appointee compared to what we have now, where we're constantly sending memorials up to Congress and to our legislators up there, telling them what we want them to do, it's a fallacy. And again, I come back to the idea that it's just an insult to the people to tell them that they don't have the wisdom to elect people that can represent them well.
I'll go ahead and then I have a question for you, but I want to give you a chance to respond.
Thank you. I don't consider it an insult to the people at all. The people are like the states. One state has a particular interest in this area, and another state has a particular interest in that area. The people have that same thing. Those that are attached to the land have interest there. Those that are attached to business have interest there. And we in the state legislature cannot look at any one individual thing. We have to consider the whole. And the people have the right to boot us state legislators out every 2 years if we're not doing what they think we ought to do. So we represent the people in the state level to make sure the state doesn't lose its sovereignty and is encroached upon. The people, if the senators are answerable to the people, then who's protecting the state's sovereignty? They're not answerable to the states. And it's true, we send memorials.
But aren't the people the state?
The people, you make a very good statement there. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. No question about it. But how many people really understand what's going on in Boise during the legislative session? Yes, they understand the thing that they're interested in, but do they understand the whole picture? And so the idea was for the legislators to pick those seasoned people that understood these things in whole and have them represent the states. And there was no chance for recall. There's no recall in the Constitution. They were to serve those 6 years. And that's important because if a state changes from blue to red and red to blue and et cetera, then you foul up that consistency that has to belong to the Senate, and that's why that 6-year term is there.
Let me jump over now. That idea that that the educated, that you needed that educated the body of state legislators to make this. That was part of the founding fathers' view on that.
It was part of it, Joan. The reality is, at the time of the founding, the idea of having the legislature select the senators was probably a worthy idea because it provided states some buy-in into the newly created federal system. And of course, one of the ongoing concerns was that the federal government would swallow up states. So it was important for states to have a sense of partnership with the federal government. But the idea lost its footing and lost its traction very, very quickly because the second generation of American leaders began to backpedal. And even in 1826, proposed amendments were introduced to repeal that method of election. And so already it was recognized that the idea was not going to work, because even though in theory the proposition that the state legislature could choose worthy representatives to serve in the Senate was in fact shown to be the case that those senators were not representing state interests so much as they were being caught up in the control of financiers and companies, and that ushered in the period of scandals and corruption and bribery. And so while it was a good idea initially for a variety of reasons, it appeared unworkable, and shortly after that amendment was introduced, that's when we saw all the deadlocks governing the country, and in fact that left the states without a chance to affect the authority of the national government.
I would also add that it was a pretty pragmatic decision. You needed to be able to appeal to the states to ratify the Constitution. So you needed to throw the states some kind of bone to have them buy in, because there were people, of course, at the state level that felt like they wanted a strong central government, other people that were for decentralization. So you wanted to give them the mishmash in the Constitution that provided them with the comfort to be able to vote and ratify this at the state level.
We've got our phones filling up. Let's go to our first
But
caller. Let me get this first
okay.
caller, and then we'll go. Linda in Homedale. Linda.
Oh, hi. I'm totally in support of the 17th Amendment repeal. I think that we need to go back to our founding fathers' original plans. And the issue isn't so much the political aspect of it, it's the moral fiber of the people that are running for office. And we need to get back to a more faith-based foundation and bring God back into the picture, because he's been left out a long time ago.
Okay, thank you for your call. Let me grab one more before we get, we'll try and get Norma in Ontario, I think. There we go. Norma in Ontario.
Howdy.
Hi, go ahead.
Yes, I'm very fond of keeping Oregon as the first one to go by this selection, and I think we ought to stay that way. We have really good representations from our senators, and we get to see them once in a while, and if we had them going to Boise for selection or to Salem, we would never get to see them. So this way we get more contact with them, and we're a much better educated people today. Thanks.
Thank you for your call.
Interesting.
Okay, get a couple there. You were going to jump in.
Well, when we refer to the good old days and how things happen to change, what has happened since the change? We have senators that are financed by multinational corporations, and the fight to be a senator is a very expensive fight anymore. I really question if that's not even a bigger problem than what, because if there's 105 of us legislators in Idaho, for them to come and influence every one of us, that gets to be a bit of a problem, because we have to file a sunshine report, much the same as the U.S. senators do, but then the people can gain access to that, and we're watching each other. When you're in competition in election, the competition checks your sunshine report, and those things get exposed very easily to the people. And I'm saying that we would have what's happened to the state's sovereignty since that has happened. We've lost our state sovereignty. We are being encroached upon constantly by the federal government, and it has become greater than the creator, and there needs to be that balance there. And where's the balance if the state doesn't have a say in the matter?
Wow. If you really want campaign finance reform, we need to have publicly financed elections, because you'll take money out of the system. The only thing that's going to happen to the money that's currently invested in the U.S. senator races is it's going to drop down into the states. It's going to corrupt the legislative races in a huge way, and it did that in the good old days as well. In addition, the 105 legislators, there are 105 of us, but there are some legislators that have much more influence within the legislative process. And so you'd end up with people concentrating on certain races and concentrating direct effort in terms of trying to subvert the process and actually taking the voice of the people away. I think that, David, you might want to address the moral fiber issue because I think that's kind of an interesting thing that was raised.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that representatives are exhibiting better morals or poorer morals depending on the method by which they're selected. I think that's not relevant here. But to go back to one of the initial points, the founders recognized, in fact, that the plan, the original plan, was not going to be successful, and that's why the proposals to amend the original design were underway. And we saw through the emergence of the desire of representatives in the state legislature to influence U.S. senators that they began to run on campaigns that included a pledge to vote for or to support one candidate for the Senate over the other. And that became a distraction for state legislators because they became part and parcel of the larger campaigns for the United States Senate. So that really distracted them from their business, and that too encouraged some graft and some corruption.
It actually, interesting enough, when you mentioned that, there was also there was a historical look at legislatures and how they were operating at that time, and it was they found that it was a big distraction from actually state business for those legislatures that were arguing continually about trying to appoint U.S. senators. So they were actually not focusing on the states.
I want to give Representative Nielsen a chance to get in here.
Well, the issue really boils down to the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment was created so that the states would have sovereignty. What's happened to state sovereignty since the repeal of the 17th Amendment? It has disappeared gradually, and even so, there's another aspect. The Senate confirms who is appointed to the Supreme Court. When was the last time you ever heard of any dialogue on the selection of the Supreme Court members where they were asking questions on how did they feel about state sovereignty and what was their decisions on that? That, it's always on other issues, and I'm simply saying to you, as Madison said, the senators will be appointed by the legislatures, and though elected for 6 years, I do not conceive they will soon forget the source from whence they derive their political existence. This election of one branch by the federal by the state legislature secures an absolute dependence of the federal on the latter, the states. And you get, the federal is going to collapse someday if the states do not exist anymore.
Let me get a call in here. George in Ammon. George.
Yes, my opinion is that we should keep the 17th Amendment. I don't see how it will benefit us as a state to not have it. The thing that I do see is taking one more right away from the citizens of Idaho because some folks in our legislature think we are not smart enough to elect decent senators. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative, you do have a hard case to sell here because people don't like the idea of giving up their right to vote.
And you want to know something? I cannot blame them for feeling that way to some degree. But if they want state sovereignty to happen, then the states have to be a constituent. And we're not alone in this issue. The state of Washington, the GOP there adopted it into their platform too, and I know this Tom Hand that proposed that resolution and got it supported that way. This is a movement. Why is this movement coming about?
Joan, may I address that? Let's go back to some basics. We often misuse the term sovereignty. States are not sovereign. Only the people are sovereign. No state entity, no governmental entity can be sovereign. Sovereignty resides in the people. What states and all governmental entities have are powers or jurisdiction to a certain degree. So we should be careful about using those terms. In the same way that states don't have rights, states have powers. We understand the emotional interest in asserting states' rights because that has greater currency. So what we're really talking about when you raise the 10th Amendment is simply to ask, what are those powers left to the states? And I think that's what gives rise to the cry for the repeal of the 17th Amendment, because many people believe that the federal government has grown to be too powerful. So it's really an issue of federal versus state authority. That's what we're talking about, and how best to promote what we perceive to be state interest. The problem with trying to align senators with state interests these days is that it's always been difficult to say that senators represent state interests, because senators are in many ways influenced by powerful lobbying groups, as they were in 1826, as they are today. And so if we were to repeal the 17th Amendment, I'm concerned, that would deprive the ordinary people of having a voice in the selection of their senators. Rather, the powerful voices in the legislature, influenced by interest groups, right or left, would have a field day.
Oh, and right now, a U.S. Senator's constituents, every person in the state that votes, they're the people that they have to answer to, instead of a few kingmakers in the legislature. So as an ordinary person, if you want to communicate with your U.S. Senator today and say, I'm a voter and I think this and that, whereas if we repealed the 17th Amendment, you'd be in a position where a U.S. Senator could just kind of blow off the people of the state, because the kingmakers are the people that really matter, the ones that are in the legislature sitting in the back rooms. Of course, we have closed caucuses. So, in the closed, the smoky room with the closed doors is where those decisions are made. So,
and just remember, both Republicans and the Democrats have closed
Yes,
caucuses.
yeah.
So that's not just the ours.
May I
Yes, please.
say this? I don't believe in the principle of kingmakers. Yes, the D's have a leadership, the R's have a leadership, and they do their functions. To say they're the kingmakers, I have voted against leadership more than once. I represent my people in my constituency, and the people are brilliant, they really are, but they have an interest this way and they have an interest this way. We in the legislature have to look at the whole. You see what I'm saying? We have to look at the whole. And I'm convinced of this, that where we're headed now is not the direction that we want to be going.
But is this the best way to effectively protect the power that the states have? Is this, because there are other ways that people have suggested to help strengthen the balance of power, or tip the balance of power more to states. Is this the best way to do it?
Well, let me continue on that thought. It's been mentioned here tonight that it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. If that's really true and that's followed to the nth degree, then you can only give government a power that you have yourself. Now, when it comes to leveling, as what our founding fathers talked about, or redistribution of wealth today, how can you communicate that power to your state government or to your federal government if you don't have the power to go out to your neighbor and say, you got to give me so much money and the sheriff's going to come and make sure you do it? Well, that can't be done. So how does that line of authority from the people get delegated to government? The people are our source, and we need to remember that all the time. You can only delegate to somebody else a power you have yourself. And so if it's really a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we need to protect that very thing so that the people are the ones that make that decision about who gets the power to do such and such. And that has been abridged immensely, maybe not just because of the 17th Amendment, but many other things, Supreme Court rulings like Butler in 1936 and etc., changing meanings of things.
We have a whole bunch of people on the phone, so if you're on the phones, and stay with us because we've got about 4 minutes left before we go off the air, but we will try and get to your phone calls when we flip to the other side on our web-only program. So if you're on the phones with us, stay with us and we'll get to your call. I know we've got to get.
Well, I just wanted to say, it appears to me that if people are qualified to elect me as a state senator and Representative Nielsen as a representative, they should be qualified to elect and make decisions about their United States Senator. The idea of stripping them of the right to vote is just, I just think it borders on really unthoughtful, and kind of in the end, when you look at how we're moving on the GOP side, it really follows a pattern of kind of trying to strip some rights from people and freedoms from people that they should rightfully have.
I want to give you one chance, and then we'll give you the last word for this program.
The 17th Amendment, Joan, was passed during the era known as the Progressive Period, in which the great thrust was about open government transparency and enhancing the power of the people to affect their own government. the same era in which we saw the right of women to vote. And so if we were to turn back the clock and to take away that right of the people to vote, there would be great distress in the country, and ironically, many of those who are pushing for repeal of the 17th Amendment would be the first to be disenfranchised. They would lose that voice. So the 17th Amendment empowers people from all walks of life to have an impact on the selection of their senators.
I want to give you the
This is all good talk, and I love the people, and they're very, very intelligent. But in the process, we have fouled up the balance and check that the state needs to remain a qualified state and have some power in the system that they do not enjoy today. And that needs to be restored by one means or another. The only means that I see right now to be able to do that is to repeal the 17th Amendment and save the power of the states and those things for the people, so the people are, should we say, empowered even more. Because what can the people do against the federal government if the state cannot do anything for them?
Well, the premise of what the representative's talking about is the idea that somehow senators, when you appoint them through the legislative process, are beholden to the legislature. They're not. We can't recall them. The federal government pays their salary. It just doesn't work that way. You appoint them, they go to the federal government at the federal level, and they act. They don't vote as states, they vote as individuals. And so it just doesn't work that way.
Do you think you propose any legislation this time around to actually call for a constitutional convention or a constitutional amendment?
I think there may be a movement to do that. I'm not knowing that I'm really prepared to do that, but nevertheless, we have got to do something to stop growth of federal government and even growth of state government, so the people are represented more. The lowest form of government is the best form of government, and we're detracting from that immensely these days, and we need to move back. And I honestly believe that our founding fathers were inspired of our Father in heaven to do what they did. And yes, they gave us a means to amend the Constitution, no question about it.
And I have to catch up because we've run out of time for this one. But I said if you're on the phone, hang with us and we'll catch you on the flip side. I'd like to thank our guest, Representative Pete Nielsen. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Senator Work, I appreciate you joining us
It
tonight.
was an honor. Thank you.
Dave Adler, I appreciate you being here.
Pleasure to be with you.
If you'd like to learn more about this issue, go to the Dialogue website. We also have a poll there you can take. You'll find it at idahoptv.org. Go ahead and click on Dialogue, look for the poll, look for more information, facts, and our web-only conversation. You'll find us on Facebook, search for Dialogue on Idaho Public Television, and become a like. Or you look for our shows on YouTube. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you here next time on Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web